So, our worship theme at Summit for the month of January is living with intention. And what does that mean? For one possible meaning, we can think of being in the moment, which is essentially what Mary was talking about in her Time for All Ages. Are you paying attention to what you are doing? When you're walking down the street, are you feeling your body move? Are you aware of the people and the trees and the birds and the buildings that you are passing by? Or is your mind wandering off elsewhere? Here, living with intention means paying attention to your actions and being aware of what you are doing right now, in the present moment. But living with intention can also work on a larger scale. Are there things you would like to happen in your life? Are there things that you would like to change in the world? And if so, are these just dreams? Or are you living with your intentions and taking steps to make them happen? This second meaning is the one that I'd like to talk about today. How do we make big changes in society? How can we take our dreams for the future and actually make them happen? Or do we simply trust and hope that our dreams will come true? It's January, and this Saturday, January 15th, is the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. He would have been 93 years old on Saturday had he not been assassinated. And in honor of his birthday, I'd like to connect the idea of living with intention to one of his most famous sayings. The moral arc of the universe bends toward justice. King used this saying frequently in the last 10 years of his life. In fact, on Sunday, March 31st, 1968, 4 days before his assassination, King preached a sermon at the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. He closed his sermon by explaining why it was that he thought that we shall overcome the forces supporting racism, war, poverty, and injustice. And in these closing words, he paraphrased not one, but several Unitarian ministers. We shall overcome, he said, because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Now, if you've been a Unitarian Universalist for long, you've almost certainly had someone tell you that really this saying came from a Unitarian, because we like to claim credit wherever we can. It's from an 1853 sermon by Theodore Parker, a Unitarian minister and abolitionist, and one of the early members of the Transcendentalist movement. Here is what Parker wrote in 1853. Look at the facts of the world, he said. You see a continual and progressive triumph of rightness. I do not pretend to understand the moral universe. The arc is a long one. My eye reaches but little ways. I cannot calculate the curve and complete the figure by experience of sight. I can divine it by conscience. And from what I see, I am sure it bends toward justice. Things refuse to be mismanaged long. Jefferson trembled when he thought of slavery and remembered that God is just. So already there's a connection between Theodore Parker's words and the difference between intentions and actions. Because Jefferson may have trembled, but he sure didn't release the people he kept in bondage. Things refuse to be mismanaged long, says Parker. But is that really true? Martin Luther King memorably summarized Parker's paragraph into that one simple sentence. The moral arc of the universe is long, but it bends toward justice. But King, like Parker, phrases this passively. It bends. But why does it bend? And who is doing the bending? In his sermon at the National Cathedral, King gave a suggestion as to who is doing the bending. "We shall overcome," King said, "because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." "We shall overcome," he said, "because the historian Thomas Carlyle is right. No lie can live forever." "We shall overcome," he said, "because the poet William Cullen Bryant is right. Truth, crushed to earth, will rise again." And "we shall overcome," King said, "because James Russell Lowell is right." And then King quotes a hymn that they had sung earlier that very moment in March 1968 at the National Cathedral. A hymn written by 3 Unitarian ministers based on a poem by the Unitarian abolitionist James Russell Lowell. It's a hymn that is still in our hymnal today. It's in our gray hymnal, number 119, "Once to Every Soul and Nation." What does this say? What does this hymn say about why the moral arc of the universe is bending towards justice? What does it say about why we will overcome? The words of the hymn give one explanation, one reason why we should have hope, even in the midst of injustice. The hymn says, "Though the cause of evil prosper, yet 'tis truth alone is strong. Though truth's portion be the scaffold, and upon the throne be wrong, yet that scaffold sways the future, and behind the dim unknown, God is standing in the shadow, keeping watch above his own." So at the end of his sermon, as he tries to give his listeners reasons to hope, Martin Luther King quotes these words from the hymn to help us conceive of a larger picture. There may be injustice now, but the moral arc of the universe is long. God is in the shadows, and with God's help, the arc will bend toward justice. But do not misunderstand. With God's help, not just by God's will alone. I think that neither Theodore Parker nor Martin Luther King are trying to imply that God's will is enough to bring about justice without the work of people. People are perhaps inspired by God, and in Parker's view, they may be the vehicles of God's will, but the hard work of people is necessary. And for those of us like me who don't believe in the type of God that Parker and King believed in, it's essential to look at the role of people. Earlier in his sermon that day, King made this very clear. In the sermon, he echoes what he wrote in that letter from the Birmingham jail 5 years earlier. He refers once again to what he calls the myth of time, the myth that things will get better if we just wait, the myth that the moral arc of the universe will bend itself. Earlier in that sermon, just 4 days before he was killed, King said, "We must come to see that human progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and the persistent work of dedicated individuals who are willing to be co-workers with God. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the primitive forces of social stagnation. So we must help time and realize that the time is always ripe to do right." Earlier in our service, Barbara played improvisations on "We're Gonna Sit at the Welcome Table," a freedom song that had its start as a spiritual. it's important to understand the context of this song. It's also in our gray hymnal, number 407. And given the verses that are printed in our hymnal, it is easy for people who don't know the song's history to assume that it's celebratory. Hooray! We're all going to sit at the welcome table. Let's party. But for the enslaved people who sang this song in the 19th century, and for the civil rights workers who sang it in the 20th, the song was a reminder of justice denied. In God's kingdom, perhaps, everyone will sit at the welcome table, but here on earth that was not and is not the case. The song is a reminder of the work that is left for us to do. And it is a reminder for those of us who are privileged enough to be at the table that it is our duty to put out place settings for everyone. To put out place settings and find enough chairs and throw open the doors and send out the invitations. The table does not set itself. The ark bends, but only when we push it. Our intention is to be welcoming. Our intention is for a just world. But time alone, or God alone, will not bend that ark toward justice. Our work is clear. It is set out before us. May we have the strength and the courageous love needed to do our duty. The strength and the courageous love needed to make our intentions reality and to bring justice to the world. May it be so.